When rescuers found his helmet still recording 2 weeks later, they knew something had gone terribly wrong. The camera, half buried beneath damp leaves, had captured nothing but the whisper of wind and the soft hum of the forest for days. Yet the silent footage felt heavier than any scream. Ethan Moore wasn't the sort of man who vanished without a trace. At 29, he was an amateur cyclist with a steady job, a loyal group of friends, and a growing love for the solitude of Oregon's mist-covered trails. His weekends were often spent chasing the winding roads that curled through the mountains, the kind of places where time slowed and phone signals faded. He recorded every ride not for fame or followers, but because he believed beauty deserved to be remembered. On the morning he disappeared, the air was still and cold. He sent a brief text before setting off. "Back by sunset." Those would be the last words anyone received from him. Hours later, the sun dipped. Behind the trees, the forest swallowed the light, and Ethan Moore simply ceased to exist. No distress call, no crash alert, only a trail that ended where the silence began. For the first few days, everyone believed Ethan would come riding out of the forest, exhausted but smiling, brushing off the worry as overreaction. He knew those mountain roads better than anyone. He'd spent years cycling through the back roads of Oregon, memorizing every curve and clearing, but as each day passed without a single sign of him, that quiet confidence began to fracture. On the second morning after he vanished, local authorities launched a formal search. Dozens of volunteers combed through muddy tracks and narrow woodland paths, guided by drones and scent dogs. Helicopters traced the ridgelines, their low hum echoing through the canyons. The officers kept reassuring the family it was likely an accident, perhaps a fall, maybe a twisted ankle keeping him from getting back to the road, but even they could not ignore the growing unease. There was no emergency call from Ethan's GPS beacon, no crash alert from his smartwatch, no sign of a struggle. Only a single set of tire marks that trailed off the gravel road and vanished into the damp undergrowth. They found only tire tracks ending abruptly near a forest road. The line made its way into every local newspaper by the end of the week. It sounded harmless on paper, but for those searching, it carried an unbearable weight. Tracks that simply ended meant one of two things. The cyclist had been lifted, one way or another, from the earth. By the fifth day, the operation expanded into one of the largest rural searches the small county had seen in years. Local rangers, volunteer climbers, and even amateur drone enthusiasts joined in. The surrounding forest was deceptive, a labyrinth of pine and fog where distance lost meaning. Visibility shifted with the weather. One moment you could see the tree line, the next it dissolved into white mist. Each new day felt like chasing a ghost through an endless maze. The community of cyclists from neighboring towns began to arrive as word spread. They organized informal search rides, printing posters with Ethan's face. Missing, last seen cycling Highway 214 17th June. Cafes and petrol stations became meeting points for volunteers. The town's Facebook group turned into a coordination hub filled with people offering to bring food, torches, and fuel for the search teams. In small towns, when one person disappears, it's never just their family that grieves, the whole place feels it, like a fracture spreading through shared ground. Ethan's friends refused to give up. They retraced his favorite loops, stopping at overlooks he used to photograph, calling out his name even when logic told them it was pointless. Some nights, they left glow sticks and candles along the roadside, hoping somehow he'd find his way back by their light. The forest, however, remained silent. On the 10th day, the search scaled down. The official reason? Dwindling resources. But to the people who'd walked those hills for hours on end, it felt more like surrender. The sheriff's department issued a statement saying there was no evidence of foul play at this stage. For many, that was just another way of saying they had no idea what had happened. Then came the 14th day, the day hope briefly reignited. A volunteer named Sarah Whitman a retired park ranger who had been walking with her dog near the southern edge of the search zone, noticed something glinting among the moss and roots. At first, she thought it was a rock catching the sunlight, but when she pushed the ferns aside, she froze. There, lying half-covered in damp soil, was a black cycling helmet, its visor cracked, the once sleek surface streaked with mud. It wasn't the helmet itself that stopped her heart, it was the small, blinking red light on the side. The GoPro, camera mounted on top, was still recording. She called the search team immediately. When officers arrived, they handled the helmet as though it were made of glass. The device had been running continuously, its battery long dead, but the memory card still intact. To everyone present, the discovery felt both like a miracle and a warning. It meant that at least part of Ethan's final moments might be captured within that tiny piece of plastic and circuitry. As the news broke, the media descended on the area. The forest that had been so eerily quiet was suddenly alive with flashing lights and murmuring reporters. Locals stood by the road in silence, watching as evidence bags were sealed and carried into police vehicles. Sarah, shaken but composed, told a journalist later that evening, "I didn't find Ethan, I just found what he left behind." Behind the scenes, investigators worked quickly. The GoPro was sent to the state forensics lab for data recovery. Even before they accessed the footage, detectives already knew this changed everything. An active camera meant Ethan hadn't crashed and lain there for days. Something, or someone, had taken him away before he ever had the chance to return home. The footage, once retrieved, would hold the key to understanding those final moments, the stretch of road where silence turned deadly. But for now, no one could bear to speculate. The town, exhausted and hollow from 2 weeks of uncertainty, waited for answers that might hurt more than the not knowing. That evening, the sun dipped behind the same tree line Ethan had ridden towards on the morning of his disappearance. The posters still fluttered in the breeze, some torn, some fading. Families drove home with empty looks, and the forest, once again, swallowed the sound. But now, somewhere within that darkness, there was proof faint, fragile but real, that Ethan Moore's story was not yet over. The footage from Ethan's helmet camera was recovered 2 days after the discovery. The forensic technicians worked through the night, handling the mud-streaked device as though it were a relic from another world. Its casing was cracked, the lens smudged, but the memory card was intact. When they finally managed to extract the files, there were just over 9 hours of continuous recording, Ethan's final journey, preserved frame by frame. At first, the footage seemed ordinary, even comforting. It began with the familiar ritual of a weekend ride. Ethan adjusting his gloves, the faint jingle of his bike chain, the muffled rhythm of tires crunching over gravel. The morning light slanted through the trees, painting the road in gold. He hummed to a tune playing softly through his earbuds, something upbeat, casual, a soundtrack to solitude. Every few miles he spoke aloud to himself, as if the camera were a companion. He pointed out deer in the distance, commented on the sharp chill in the air, and joked about needing another cup of coffee. It was so human, so normal, that the officers in the darkened viewing room felt momentarily at ease. For the first 7 hours, nothing seemed amiss. The scenery changed from open fields to narrow trails and shaded forest roads, but Ethan's tone never wavered. He laughed at his own thoughts, stopped for water, adjusted his helmet, and carried on. There was even a point where he leaned his bike against a fence and filmed the horizon, whispering something about how this view never gets old. But at precisely 7 hours, 43 minutes, and 29 seconds, the peaceful rhythm was broken. A faint sound entered the background, the low growl of an engine. At first, it was distant, easily dismissed as traffic from a far-off road. Yet, as the minutes passed, the sound grew louder, distinct. The camera picked up Ethan glancing back over his shoulder once, then again, for longer this time. He chuckled, a nervous, uncertain laugh. "Guess someone else fancied the same route," he said aloud, though there was no one to hear him. The road behind him was empty, save for the flicker of something dark moving between the trees. A vehicle, perhaps a large SUV, its headlights off even though the sun was beginning to sink. In the next stretch of the footage, Ethan's breathing became faster. He shifted gears, standing slightly on his pedals, glancing behind him every few seconds. The forest closed in around the road, branches arching overhead like ribs. The hum of the engine returned, closer now, echoing off the trees. The officers watching the playback noted how the tone of the video had changed from carefree to quietly suffocating. He joked nervously, but never realized it was the last few minutes of his life. About 10 minutes later, Ethan slowed, pulling his bike to the side of the road to let the vehicle pass. But it didn't. The sound of the engine idled a few yards, back, unseen behind the curve. There was silence long enough to make the viewers in the room shift uncomfortably. Then the engine roared, the camera jolted violently. The image blurred as Ethan was thrown forward, the view tumbling into dirt and leaves. For several seconds there was only chaos, a crash of metal, the gasp of someone winded, the spinning world caught in fragments of motion, sky, ground, wheel, tree, then stillness. The sound of breathing shallow, ragged human filled the air. The lens was half buried now, facing sideways into the forest floor. Through the distorted frame, the outlines of the bike were visible, twisted, one wheel still spinning weakly. The engine noise returned, lower this time, idling somewhere close. And then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, crunching over gravel. Whoever it was, they weren't running. They were walking slowly, as if inspecting something. The footsteps stopped near the camera, and for the briefest moment, the velvety edge of a black boot appeared in frame. There was a pause, the kind of silence that feels aware of itself. Then a faint metallic click, followed by a slow exhale. A gloved hand reached down, partly obscured by the leaves. It touched the edge of the helmet, turning it slightly. The camera caught the movement blurred, colorless but enough for the technicians to freeze-frame it later. The hand lingered there, and then, as though realizing it was being recorded, the person pressed something against the lens. A sudden flash of darkness swallowed the picture. The audio, however, continued for another 30 seconds. The sounds were faint, a low drag, something being moved, then another door closing in the distance. Finally, the hum of the engine again, fading into nothing. After that, only the soft hiss of the forest and the chirp of crickets filled the recording. When the footage ended, the room remained silent. No one spoke. Even seasoned detectives found themselves staring at the frozen black screen, as if expecting it to reveal more if they waited long enough. They replayed the final minutes several times, adjusting light, enhancing shadows, isolating the sound of the engine, trying to identify the make, the model, the driver. But the forest gave up no answers. Outside the viewing room, rain began to fall against the windows. The lead investigator, a woman who had seen her share of grim cases, rubbed her eyes and whispered, almost to herself. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how wrong. In the days that followed, fragments of the footage leaked to the press, blurred stills, incomplete transcripts. The public reacted with horror, but also fascination. For many, it wasn't just a story about a missing cyclist anymore. It was about the unnerving intimacy of seeing the moment a life is stolen, captured by the victim himself. Ethan's helmet, once a symbol of safety, had become the vessel of his final truth, a 9-hour confession written in silence and fear. The investigators now had proof that whatever happened on that road was not an accident. And somewhere out there, in the quiet valleys of Oregon, someone knew the rest of the story. The footage from Ethan's helmet became the centerpiece of an investigation that quickly spiraled far beyond a missing person case. Detectives from the Oregon State Police spent days combing through the corrupted files, freezing every frame that might reveal something, anything that could explain what happened on that lonely mountain road. It was during one of those painstaking reviews that a faint reflection in the GoPro lens caught their attention. The outline of a black SUV, followed by a partial view of its number plate, barely visible through the dust and blur. Digital forensics enhanced the frame as much as possible, and though the numbers were incomplete, it was enough to raise an unsettling connection. That vehicle had appeared in another unsolved disappearance 2 years earlier, also involving a cyclist, also on a remote woodland trail not far from where Ethan vanished. The revelation shifted the investigation into darker territory. Detectives began cross-referencing missing person reports across Oregon and Washington, finding patterns that were disturbingly similar. Experienced cyclists, always alone, always near dense forest routes, rarely used by cars. The disappearances had been spaced out over months, even years, suggesting someone patient, methodical, someone who knew the terrain. For the first time, police began to suspect a serial offender who might have been stalking outdoor enthusiasts under the guise of an ordinary motorist. When investigators re-examined traffic cameras from nearby towns, they noticed a black SUV passing through the same checkpoints shortly before each reported disappearance. The plate was always obscured, sometimes by mud, sometimes by deliberate tampering. No solid identification, no driver captured clearly enough to trace. But the consistency was undeniable, and it painted a picture not of coincidence, but of predation. Ethan's family, meanwhile, were trapped in a cycle of grief and disbelief. His mother refused to accept that her son's life had ended without a trace. She attended every press briefing, every public search, often standing silently behind police tape, holding the same photograph of Ethan smiling with his bike. "Someone knows," she told a local reporter, her voice trembling with both conviction and exhaustion. "Someone saw something, even if they don't realize it yet." Her persistence reignited public attention, pushing the case back into the headlines. Online communities began dissecting every second of the GoPro footage. Amateur sleuths uploaded stabilized versions, slowed-down analyses, color-corrected frames, claiming to show faces in the reflections. Forums buzzed with speculation. Was Ethan targeted for robbery? Was it a hit-and-run covered up in panic? Or was there something far more deliberate, a predator who hunted cyclists in the wilderness, confident that nature would erase the evidence? The idea of a serial offender captured the public imagination, feeding both fascination and fear. Detectives entertained multiple theories. Some believed the driver might have accidentally struck Ethan and fled, later attempting to retrieve the body to destroy evidence. Others suggested a deeper, more chilling motive, a pattern of abductions concealed under the guise of road accidents. What made this theory more plausible was a discovery from the earlier case in 2021, a fragment of a GoPro mount found in a ditch 20 miles north, with similar scrape marks and a trace of paint matching a dark SUV. That case had gone cold. The cyclist never found, the family left with only fragments of unanswered questions. Forensic teams revisited both sites, mapping them against known Forestry Service routes and hunting grounds. They found that each disappearance occurred within a 10-mile radius of a disused logging road, one that connected several towns but was rarely patrolled. Whoever the driver was, they knew these routes well enough to vanish without leaving tire marks detectable from the main roads. Months passed, and despite renewed searches using drones, sniffer dogs, and divers in nearby lakes, no human remains were found. The forest had long reclaimed its silence, swallowing tracks, scents, and clues. The black SUV, too, seemed to have vanished from existence. With no fresh leads, the investigation slowed, though it was never officially closed. For detectives, the lingering question wasn't just who took Ethan, but why. Why follow him for miles before striking? Why risk being caught on camera at all? In the absence of closure, the story began to morph into something else, a cautionary tale whispered among cyclists in the Pacific Northwest. People started avoiding the old mountain routes. Signs were posted warning riders not to go alone. For some, Ethan's case became a symbol of the hidden dangers in the vast, beautiful wilderness that so many considered a place of peace. For others, it was a haunting reminder of how easily the ordinary could turn fatal. Years later, one retired officer admitted in a documentary interview that there was a theory they could never prove: that the same SUV had been seen near a secluded cabin owned by a man with prior charges of assault and illegal firearm possession. The property was searched, but nothing was found linking him to Ethan or to any other victim. The man disappeared shortly after the investigation gained media attention. His name remains sealed in official documents, but the speculation endures in online discussions. Today, Ethan Moore's disappearance sits among Oregon's most unsettling mysteries, one that blurs the line between accident, crime, and legend. The recovered helmet, with its final, fragmented recording, stands as the last witness. And for those who have seen the unedited footage, they say there's a moment just before the impact when Ethan glances back as if he senses what's coming. His expression isn't fear. Exactly. It's recognition. That single frame has become the haunting image that defines the case, a frozen second between life and oblivion. And as the years pass, that same question echoes through every cold case meeting, every late-night forum thread, every forest path where the wind rustles through the trees. Who was driving the black SUV, and how many others never made it home? Ethan's story lingers long after the final frame fades to black. It's not just the mystery of what happened on that fog-covered road that stays with you, but the quiet humanity woven through it, the voice of a young man who loved the wild, who filmed his journeys not for fame, but for the simple joy of being alive. His GoPro was supposed to capture moments of peace and freedom. Instead, it recorded the unthinkable. And in doing so, it left behind a haunting reminder that adventure and danger often ride side by side. In a world where the wilderness still holds both beauty and threat, Ethan's disappearance becomes more than a cautionary tale. It's a reflection of how fragile safety truly is when we're alone, far from help, trusting that the world will stay kind. We never think the next curve in the road might be our last, yet for Ethan, it was. Perhaps that's why his story feels so human, because it could have been anyone. A friend, a brother, a son. Someone who simply went out for a ride and never came home. If stories like this resonate with you, if you believe every mystery deserves to be told, every unanswered question deserves a voice, then subscribe to the channel. Stay with us for the next story. Because somewhere out there, beyond the silence of the pines and the fog of forgotten roads, another truth is waiting to be found.